Ehrenfeld for dedicating all the Sherman Drushos this month in memory of Yona's grandfather Yosef ben Shmuel Aron, Benjamin and Elys Wohl for dedicating the Sherman Drushos this month in memory of Moshe Chaim ben Tzvi Hirsch. Our week of learning sponsors, Hilary Jacobson-Kent, in commemoration of the yahrzeit of Shifra bas Chana Dena. So we thank all of our sponsors for their incredible generosity, and with that, let us begin. Today's daf is Ayin Ches 78, and we are picking up Emir Hashem at Ayin Zayin Amud Beis. We're picking up 12 lines up from the bottom at the two dots. Mitzri ve'edomi einon asurn. Suppose just if you remember again when we spoke about this in the Mishnah, so the Mishnah spoke about the idea that converts from Mitzrayim and Edom permitted to convert but are restricted in the marriage pool up until 3 generations. Rabbi Shimon came along and said, the truth is, I think that the men should be restricted up until 3 generations, and the women should be permitted immediately. Now, he made a kavachomer. What was his kavachomer? If when it comes to Ammon and Moab, where the men are restricted forever, the women are permitted immediately, then all the more so Mitzrayim and Edom, where the men are only restricted for 3 generations, the women should certainly be permitted immediately. If you remember again, then the back and forth was, the Rabbanan said back to Rabbi Shimon, is this your own idea, or is this the tradition you received from your Rebbeim? If it's your own kavachomer, then we can ask a question on it. If it's the tradition you received from your Rebbeim, then ultimately we'll accept it. That's the background. So says the Gemara, my tshuva. What was the refutation? Had it been Rabbi Shimon's own kavachomer, what would have been the refutation that the rabbis would have leveled against it? Amr Rabbi Yochanan, Mishum di'ika lamemar arayos yochichu. Chazabos, you can bring a raya against this, a proof against this kavachomer from arayos. Now listen to this. This is actually fascinating. If you take a look at the first wide line of Rashi, arayos yochichu shelo asr bahen ela shlosha doros bas bito asurlo v'hu bichlal. Listen to this. When it comes to arayos, immorality, interestingly enough, the prohibition on immoral relationships with close relatives only goes for 3 generations. So just as fascinating, so just on a simple level, there's a prohibition, of course, one's daughter is an erva to him, and a granddaughter is an erva. A great-granddaughter is not an erva. Fascinating. So therefore, the Gemara says, when it comes to arayos extends down to 3 generations, but ultimately, again, applies to both men and women. So that would be a refutation of Rabbi Shimon's kavachomer, to which the Gemara says, Shelo asraban ela ashlosha doros, echad zecharim, ve'echad nekevos. So here you see a prohibition which extends for 3 generations and yet applies equally to men and to women. This would seemingly refute the kavachomer of Rabbi Shimon. So he says, no, because mala arayos shekein kares. There's a big difference. Arayos, remember again, carry with them a penalty of kares. Mamzer yochiach. So we'll say mamzer could go ahead and refute the kavachomer. Now how so? Take a look at Rashi. Mamzer yochiach, it's in the wide lines, 3rd wide line in, end of the 3rd line. Mamzer yochiach, she'in karis bebiaso, va'aso bo bito kibno de'echal mamzer se'echal mamzer. So we'll say mamzer is a good example. Mamzer doesn't carry with it a chi of karis, but yet mamzer is a prohibition that devolves both upon men and women. To which the Gemara says, Mala mamzer, shekein anoroi lavo bekal the olam. Mamzer is different. We'll say because the restriction on mamzer to enter into the assembly of Klal Yisrael is forever. To which the Gemara says, Arayos yochichu v'chazra din lo re'izeh k're'izeh v'lo re'izeh k're'izeh. We'll say, so in reality, we try to disprove Rabbi Shimon's kavachomer from 2 sources, either from mamzer or from arayos. It turns out that at the end of the day, neither of them on their own has the ability to disprove the kavachomer. Why? Because each of them have their own unique chumrah. But yet, interestingly enough, but I will say the common denominator between the 2 is sha'asurin. They're both aser. Ve'echad zikarim, ve'echad nekevos. So we'll say what they do represent is the following situation: a situation of isser, and the isser devolves upon both men and women. Af ani avi mitzris shiu asurin echad zekaron ve'echad nekevos. Therefore, I will say, what can I learn out from them? Just like mamzer and arayos creates an isser, and the isser devolves equally upon men and women, so too I'll go ahead and I'll say that mitzri and mitzris, the prohibition of the mitzri convert, will ultimately again apply equally to both men and women. Says the Gemara, Mala Tzara Sheva Shevahen, Shiken Yeshba and Sad Karis. But I will say, one second, you can make a different common denominator between arayos and mamzer, which is that they both have an element of kares. Now remember again, mamzer, what's the mamzer's kares? Right, the mamzer's kares is in the nature of his creation, right? A mamzer is created from a relationship punishable by kares or misa. So the mamzer has kares, arayos carry with them kares. The rabbanon mechalal. So we'll say maybe that's the common denominator, and if that's the common denominator, then remember again. So that will not apply to mitzri, as mitzri has no element of kares associated with it. To which the Gemara says, "V'Rabbanon mechalal dechai ve'asei ukrebi Eliezer ben Yaakov." The Rabbanon will say there's another case. So we'll say, take a look at Rashi. The Rabbanon, da'amri yesh tshuva parchina le'Rabbi Shimon mechalal dechai ve'asei kegoin kohen gadol shenosa anusa o mafuta she'alav ba'asei besuli yikaf lo ba'ula ve'in kan lav dezona. So we'll say, listen to this. They'll go ahead and they'll bring up the situation of a chalal from the chai ve'asei. So we'll say chalal from chai ve'asei would be a situation ultimately of a kohen who, let's say, marries a woman who is not a basula. If a kohen marries a woman who is not a basula, that is only prohibited by an asay. Yet according at least to Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, it goes out and creates a chalalus. So here is a case of ongoing isser that has no misa or kares associated with it. Okay, to which the Gemara says, Umay lo, kiachi kamarlu, ledidilo svirli d'Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, ledidachu d'svirli d'Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, halacha ani omer. Shabbos says, remember again, here, let's just go back to the Mishnah. So now we understand when the Rabbanan said to Rabbi Shimon, listen, are you telling us your own kal v'chomer, or are you telling us a halacha is passed down through your Masorah? If it's your own kal v'chomer, so we could ask kashas on it. What's the kashas? That's the list we just went through. That's the pirchas. So we'll say, then Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov himself responds, and he says, no, it's not my own halacha. Rather, again, it's a Masorah that I have. To which the Gemara tries to understand, when Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov says lo, what was he saying? So first of all, he was saying to them was, Lididis, number one, you hold like Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov that there's a possibility to create Isser from the Chiyav Aseh. I don't hold of that. But what I will tell you is, halacha ani omer. Ultimately, again, I'm not espousing my own kal v'chomer, but rather, again, I am sharing with you the halacha as I have received the tradition through my rebbeim. Okay, to which the Gemara says, Tanya, Amar Rabbi Shimon, halacha ani omer. So Rabbi Shimon says, so I'll say a brisa that kind of parallels the Mishnah. Rabbi Shimon says, I'm sharing with you a halacha. Right, I'm sharing with you a halacha. We'll say, meaning, and again, this is not my own kal v'chomer, this is a halacha. Va'od mikra misayani. Furthermore, I have a pasuk to support my idea. Let's remember again, what's Rabbi Shimon's core idea? That by the Mitzri and Edomi converts, whereas the men are restricted from marrying into the normative marriage pool for 3 generations, the women should be permitted immediately, and that's based on a kal v'chomer with Ammoni and Moavis, or Ammoni and Moavi. To which the Gemara says, so first I have a kal v'chomer, second of all I have a pasuk that supports me. What's the pasuk? Banim v'lo banos. Rabbi said this is actually very interesting. The pasuk says by Mitzri and Edomi, Banim asher yivaldu lahem dar shlishi yavu lahem bakal Hashem. So we'll say, Rabbi Shimon says, what does the pasuk say? Sons, which will be born to them in the 3rd generation, shall enter into the assembly of Hashem. Rabbi Shimon says, what do you see from there? That the prohibition or the limitation of 3 generations only devolves upon who? Sons, and not daughters. It's a pretty explicit pasuk. To which the Gemara says, Rabbi Huda Omer, Hare Omer, Banim asher yivaldu lahem, dar shlishi, hakasuf tela'an beleda. I will say, interestingly enough, when it says Banim asher yivaldu, what it means is Leda. In other words, Banim, I will say, it doesn't have to mean sons. Banim can also just mean what? children. And the idea is it adds in the word yivoldu, leida. It's a din in birth, not a din in gender. So the idea that Rabbanan retort back and they say, no, the Torah is telling you that there's a three generation marriage moratorium on Egyptian and Edomite converts. It doesn't make a difference if they're having boys or girls. Incredible. So the Gemara says, Ilav, Rabbi Yochanan says, Ilav, Dam Rabbi Yehuda, Kasav Tlan Beleida. Had Rabbi Yehuda not advanced this idea, that halacha l'maisa, the Torah uses the word leida by the Mitzri and the Edomi converts to teach us that ultimately, again, it's dependent on three generations of birth, of children, before the ban is lifted. And that applies to both boys and girls. Lo matza yadav v'raglav bebeis hamedrash. Literally, Rabbi Yehuda would not have found his hands and feet in the Beis Medrash. Now, what does that mean? In other words, Rashi points out, he would not have been able to stand in the Beis Medrash. What's the problem? Listen to this. Rabbi Yochanan, to which the Gemara says, Kevan to Amar Mar, Kal Gerim Ikri Kal, because listen to this, we actually made reference to this machlokes before, which is, Rabbi Said, for a lot of these restrictions, whether it's mamzer or others, the Torah uses the lashon of lo yavo bekal Hashem. Now that is the phrase that's used to teach us that you may not marry into what we'll call the normative assembly of Klal Yisrael. So Rabbi say, here's the question. Are Gerim called, right, what are they? Well, are Gerim Kal Gerim? Are they the separate congregation? Are they Kal Hashem? Damar Mar, Kal Gerim Ikri Kal. Because Mar said, Kal Gerim, the assembly of Gerim, are called Kal. Look at Rashi just a moment. Last Rashi in Daf. Kevin Amar Mar, Kal Gerim Ikri Kal. Mesachas Kiddushin Isa den Lekevo Shayin LaAltar Havelu Kal. Vasuros Mitzvos Rishonu Shniel Mitzvot. Fine, let's read the verse. So Kal Gerim is called the Kal. If that's the case, that Kal Gerim is called Kal Yisrael, bosai Tapa Vayinches, we have a problem. Mitzri Sheni b'mayitar. Ultimately, again, how is a Mitzri Sheni a second generation Mitzri? How is he able to produce suitable third generation offspring? See, remember again, when a Mitzri Sheni has a kid, and we're going to talk about this in just a little bit, when a Mitzri Sheni has a child, what's the status of that child? What is he? He's a Mitzri Shlishi. What is the status of a Mitzri Shlishi? Totally regular Jew. Regular Jew. In other words, when I say regular Jew, there are no marital restrictions upon such an individual. So the shaila just becomes, how do you get to a Mitzri Sheni? Now I will say, who is a Mitzri Sheni permitted to marry? Who is he allowed to marry? Right? Well, he can marry another Mitzri, or for that matter, any convert. Here's the problem. If you hold that Kal Gerim Ikri Kal, right? If you hold that ultimately, again, the assembly of Gerim is called regular Kal Yisrael, then who is a Mitzri Sheni marrying in order to produce a Mitzri Shlishi? To which the Gemara says, maybe Dilma di Avar V'Nasiv. Maybe we're talking about a case, how do you produce a Mitzri Shlishi? Where a Mitzri Sheni does something prohibited, namely, he marries a regular Bas Yisrael or a Giores. He does something he's not allowed to do. To which the Gemara says, no, the ilo kasev kra. They will say, we wouldn't have psukim in the Torah that speak about a process that by definition is reliant on doing something prohibited. To which the Gemara says, really? Hare mamzer, di, the kasve kra. Right? Torah talks about a mamzer, and mamzer is a situation where what? Where halacha l'maisa, you did something wrong. Di li isura kasev. The ilehetera lo kasev. We'll say the Torah is psukim if you did something wrong. The Torah does not go ahead and talk about psukim where something becomes permitted through the commission of a wrong. To which the Gemara says, the ilehetera lo kasev, hari machzer grushaso, the ilehetera, the kasve. What about case a mamzer machzer grushaso, where a man divorces his wife, she marries someone else, and then halacha l'maisa, he remarries. So the Torah speaks about that case, where that is a prohibited situation, yet there's a pasuk that still references it, to which the Gemara says, Hasam Mishum Ikar Isura Hu Dekasve. Ultimately, you're going to say that is written. Why? That is written to teach us the core prohibition. Fine. So I'll say, so the idea over here is just to kind of bring this back together. The idea that the Gemara is highlighting is that first of all, halacha l'maisa, what we see from this last exchange, is the drush of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi says, so the fact that the Gemara is talking about the idea that how does a mitzri sheni produce a mitzri shlishi, and we're not making any distinctions over here between men and women, indicates to us what? That halacha l'maisa, the restriction on a mitzri for 3 generations applies to who? Both men and women. They will say that is anchored in the idea of Rabbi Yehuda, that when the Torah speaks about the prohibition of mitzri, it phrases it in terms of leida. Even though the Torah says banim, we understand banim to not mean sons, but banim to mean children. And the Torah is saying you have to birth 3 generations until that mitzri restriction is lifted. So Rabbi say, so halacha l'maisa, we do not accept the position of Rabbi Shimon. We accept the position of the Rabbanan in the Mishnah, namely that the Torah gives us a 3-generation marriage moratorium on the Mitzri and the Edomi converts, so they can convert. They're limited for 3 generations as to who they can marry, and that restriction applies both to Mitzri men and women equally. Good. Now let's go back to Chana Dena. So the Gemara asks an interesting question, still with Mitzri and Edomi. Torah says, Im ne'emar banim, lama ne'emar doros. Vim ne'emar doros, lama ne'emar banim. An interesting shayla, both sides. So the pasuk that the Gemara is referencing is like this, still by Mitzri. Here's the pasuk. Banim asher yivaldu lahem dar shlishi, yavo lahem bikal Hashem. So literally translated, sons that they will birth, that will be born to them in the 3rd generation, ultimately again could come into Kal Hashem. Here's what the Gemara is asking. Why do you have to use both the word banim and doros? Banim and doros. So I will say, what the Torah is saying is, what the Gemara is saying is, why couldn't the pasuk have just said, ben shlishi? 3rd generation son or 3rd generation child could come into the assembly of Klal Yisrael. Why do you have to write it, banim asher yivaldu lahem dar shlishi? Just say ben shlishi. Why the need for both banim and doros? To which words I'll tell you why. In ne'emar banim v'lo ne'emar doros, if the Torah would have just said sons and not generations, hayisi omer ben rishon v'sheni aser shlishi mutter. Rabbi say this is fascinating. Had the Torah just said ben shlishi, I would say, I would have thought, what does ben shlishi mean? What does ben shlishi mean? Literally, your 3rd born child. That if you're a Mitzri convert, child number 1, restricted. Child number 2, restricted. Child number 3, not restricted. That's what I would have thought ben shlishi meant. Lekach ne'emar doros. Therefore, the Torah goes ahead and says, doros, to teach you, no. This is not a din in the number of children you have, but rather, again, this is a din in generations. Vim ne'emar doros v'lo ne'emar banim. And had the Torah said doros and not said sons, I would have thought, what? Hayisi omer lo osan ha'omdin al har Sinai. I will say, this is fascinating. Had the Torah just said doros and not said banim, I would have said, when do we start to count the generations from? Har Sinai. Har Sinai. Therefore, we'll say, amazingly enough, lekach ne'emar banim. Therefore, ultimately, again, banim teaches me that no. The counting of the generations begins from when? From when you, the Mitzri, convert. When you convert, ultimately, again, that's when the generations start, not from Har Sinai. But say, take a look at Rashi for just a moment. It's almost right across. Ne'emar dar shlishi v'lo ne'emar banim. Rashi says, hayisi omer li'osem ha'yisraelim ha'omdim al har Sinai hu omer dar shlishi shalachem yavolem b'kal Hashem kilomar bachem u'bibnechem asur mitzri ve'edomi aval bibnei b'nechem mutarim u'misham b'halu mutar mitzri afilu gerishon. It's fascinating. The Havamina is, one might have thought that the clock for 3, had it just said doros, the clock for 3 generations would have begun from Matan Torah, from Har Sinai. So from Har Sinai, any those converts, children's children, ultimately again would be prohibited, but after that permitted. Kamash malan banim. So therefore I will say, I need both banim and doros, because from the combination, what I learn is the generations ultimately again start with the Mitzri convert himself, and ultimately again are counted down from there. Beautiful. I will say, what about lahem? And I will say, again, we're just picking apart the pasuk. The pasuk says, banim asher yivaldu lahem. Sons or children who will be born to them. Why do I need that lahem? This is fascinating. So the Gemara says, lahem mehem mana. Lahem teaches us that ultimately, again, count from them. Meaning what Rabbi say? That when a Mitzri converts, understand, he is the Rishon. The Mitzri, right, the convert, the original convert himself. He is the Rishon. He has a son. The son is Sheni. And the son has a son who is the grandson of the original convert. He is the Shlishi. So in other words, without that, the Havamina is, you might have thought, when do you begin the count of 3 generations? When? In other words, one might have had a Havamina from the son. Maybe the convert himself does not count as generation 1. Kamash Malon, he does. Mehem, mana lahem. Right? Lahem, mana mehem. So lahem means begin the count of the generations from the Egyptian convert himself. Next, lahem. I both say this is the next, right? Remember again. What else do you learn from lahem? Halach achar pisulan. So we'll say 2 drashas from this word. This is fascinating. Lahem also teaches me that halach lamaisa always follow the psul. Now I both say the word lahem is written twice in the pasuk. It's bar mashayvaldu lahem dar shlishi yavo lahem bekal Hashem. So first lahem teaches me that we start the 3 generation count from the convert himself. Second lahem teaches me that we follow the psul. What does it mean you follow the psul? Take a look at Rashi. Lahem halach achar pisulan chilam ksivi umashma halach achareim dim nitmu b'kshem kigo mitzri shnasi Yisraelis v'yisol shnasa mitzris halach acharein b'havlad pasa dar shlishi. I will say what this means is as follows. According to Rashi, what it means is like this. If you have an illegal marriage, where let's say a mitzri sheni marries a Yisraelis, what's the status of the offspring? The status of the offspring always follows the quote-unquote invalid parent, or we'll call genealogically blemished parent. So if you have a Mitzri Sheni who goes ahead and marries a Yisraelis, that child will have the status of the father. Not literally the status of the father, he'll be a Mitzri Shlishi, right? Because it always goes down a level. But halacha l'maisa, the offspring follows the puzzle parent. So says the Gemara, that's the other lahem. So the Gemara says, V'itzrich lemichtav lahem, v'itzrich lemichtav asher yivaldu. And you need both lahem. So I'll say lahem, remember again, right now, lahem teaches me, follow the psul. The status of the offspring is determined by the puzzle parents. So I need lahem, and I need asher yivaldu. Why? Because of Rahman asher yivaldu. Had the Torah just said asher yivaldu, havamina mibnei hamana, you might have thought meant begin the 3 generation count from the offspring, not from the convert parent himself. Therefore, again, because of Rahman Allahem. Therefore, Lahem teaches me, no, begin the count from the actual convert. Because of Rahman Allahem, and had the Torah had just said Lahem, Hava Amina, Mitzris Mu'uberes, Shenitzka, listen to this. I might have thought, listen to this, a Mitzris Mu'uberes. Let's say you have, we'll say, a pregnant Gentile Egyptian woman. Right, pregnant Gentile Egyptian woman, and now she converts. So she converts while still pregnant. So what's the halacha? He ubina chad. You might have thought, Rabbi, say that maybe both she and her child, when she gives birth, should both be considered what? A first generation Mitzri. Therefore, kasav rachmana sheyivaldu. Therefore, the Torah says no sheyivaldu to tell me that what? She is generation 1. But her offspring is generation 2. I needed to say lahem. Remember again, so lahem teaches me that you always follow the puzzle parent. So the Gemara says, sorry, the Torah says, see, interestingly enough, it's the same word. Lahem, what does lahem mean? Lahem's teaching us in this case that halacha l'maisa, if the Mitzri illegally marries someone. So we'll say, just take a simple case. Let's say a Mitzri Sheni marries a Yisraelis, a Bas Yisrael. So we'll say, Lahem teaches me, and now let's say they have a son. What's going to be the status of a son? Of the son? The son is a Mitzri Sheni. Why? Because the son follows the puzzle parent. That's what it means, lahem. Right? Lahem means the offspring follows the puzzle parent. So I'll say, interestingly enough, we have the same lashon of lo by mamzer. The lashon over of the pasuk is lo yavo mamzer bekal Hashem, gamdor asiri lo yavo lo bekal Hashem. Lo is the same thing as lahem, meaning, same way lahem means the offspring, so to speak, belongs to the mitzri, so too, lo means the offspring belongs to the mamzer. Namely, that if a mamzer illegally marries someone, the offspring is connected to the mamzer parent. So I need it both over here by mitzri and also lo by mamzer. Why? Because of Rachmana hacha mishum deba mitiba psula, ava mamzer deba mitiba kshera emelo. It was fascinating havamina. If it would have just said lahem by mitzri, I would have said that the reason why the offspring follows the puzzle mitzri parent is because ultimately, again, the origin of this child is by someone who's not genealogically pure, because the mitzri is still limited. So we'll say it's incredible. By mamzer, I would have thought mamzer is different, because as much as mamzer is a result of an illicit relationship, it's an illicit relationship between who? Between two Jews. So maybe halacha l'maisa, if the mamzer illegally marries another Jew, right? Let's say mamzer marries a Bas Yisrael, maybe the offspring should be like the genealogically pure parent. Kamash Malon, we have lo by mamzer, to which the Gemara says, because of Rahman gabe mamzer mishum dein roi lava bakali olam. But if it would have just said lo by mamzer, I would have thought that's what? That halacha l'maisa, the reason why the offspring follows the mamzer is because the mamzer is forever precluded from coming into the Kal Hashem. But in the case of the mitzri, where the limitation is not forever, the limitation is only for 3 generations, I might have thought that halacha l'maisa, perhaps the offspring does not follow the invalid parent, therefore tzricha, therefore they are both needed. So Rabbi say, just to keep track of the drashas that we have so far. So Rabbi say, so number one, we're passing that halacha l'maisa, the 3-generation prohibition applies both to men and women equally. That we've established, right? Halacha l'maisa, the next thing we've learned is the 3 generations are counted from where? Convert. Convert is 1, convert's child is 2, convert's grandchild is number 3. Good. What else do we have, Rabbi say? We have two lahems, and the 2 lahems teach us. The 2 lahems teach us that halach. First lahem teaches me, number 1, start the counting of the generations from the convert. He's generation 1. And number 2, Rabbi say, the second lahem teaches us this fascinating concept which we're now going to expand on, halach achar pisulan. That Rabbi say, which teaches me, when I have someone who is genealogically blemished, who illegally marries someone they're not supposed to, right? Or legally marries someone they're not, right? Obviously, right? So halach l'maisa, the offspring follows the psul. The offspring follows the psul. So again, just to illustrate this, a mitzri sheni, or mitzri rishon, marries a Bas Yisrael, a regular Jewish woman. The lahem teaches me the offspring is connected to the mitzri father. Right? So the offspring will be a mitzri sheni, like his father, not like his mother. Okay, let's expound on that. Says the Gemara, mitzri sheni, listen to this. Mitzri sheni shenasa mitzvahs rishona. But what about the following case? Now, this is a legal marriage, right? So we'll say, in this case over here, watch this. You have a man who's a mitzri sheni, but he marries a woman who's a mitzvahs rishona. So we'll say, what's the shaila? What's the status of the kid? Is the kid a mitzri sheni, or is the kid a mitzri shlishi? In other words, whose status does the child follow in this situation? To which the Gemara says, Bina shlishi, the offspring is going to be a shlishi. What do you see from there? Alma kasavar basar didei shadina. So Rabbi Yochanan holds that the offspring follows the status of the father. And since in this case the father is a sheni, therefore by definition the kid becomes a shlishi. Incredible. So Master Rabbi Yosef raises a kasha. Master Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Tarfon Omer, Yicholin mamzerin litar. Rabbi Tarfon says, I have a way that a mamzer could become tar. I will say that a mamzer has a way to escape his mamzerus. Now, not really himself, but rather a reference to his offspring. How? Ketzad? Mamzer nasa shifra. If a mamzer marries a shifra, so mamzer marries a maidservant, havlad evet, we'll say, watch this. The Rabbi say, if a mamzer marries a shifcha, what's the status of the offspring? So the Rabbi say, shifcha is a shifcha kinanis, right? So mamzer marries a non-Jewish maidservant. They have kids. What's the status of the kids? Havlad eved. Rabbi say, those kids are avodim kinanim. Then what happens? Shichraro. Then if the master emancipates the woman and her children, or even just the children, nimtza ben chorin. It will say, what's the status of an emancipated Eved Kanani? Full-fledged Jew. It turns out that the mamzer could have kids who are totally genealogically unblemished. What do you see from there, Rabbi say? Whose status do the kids follow? Alma basar didoshatinale. So we'll say, now again, what's obvious in that case? That the children take on the status of the mother. So we'll say two contradictory cases. In case number one, we said that a mitzvah sheni marries a mitzvah rishon, right? Ultimately, again, the kids are going to be a mitzvah shlishi, so like the father. So then kids follow the status of the father. Second case, mamzer has kids with a shifcha. Ultimately, again, those kids are avadim kinanim, following the status of the mother. So which one is it? To which the Gemara says, no, that's not a good raya by mamzer. Hasam namakra haishav yiladet yela adonel. They will say, no. The Eved Kanani case is not a fair case. They will say because everyone agrees in that case, an Eved is the property of the master, and her kids are the property of the master as well. So you can't bring a raya from that case. That's a totally separate case. Massive Rava. So Rava raises a kasha. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Minyamin ger mitzri haya lichab mitalid Rabbi Akiva. Was discussing a few days ago. Rabbi Yehuda said, Minyamin was an Egyptian convert, and he was my friend, and we were both in Shir, Rabbi Akiva Shir together. Va'amar, Minyamin used to say, Ani Mitzri Yishon. I'm a first generation Mitzri, right? He's the convert, first generation. V'nasati Mitzri Yishona. And I married a girl who was also Mitzvah Rishona. Then we had a son, right? Or we're going to have a son. Hopefully we'll have a son, right? My son is going to be a Mitzvah Sheni. Asil Libni Mitzvah Shnia. Kadeshi Hey Ben Bini Roy Lava Bakal. And if my son marries a Mitzvah Shnia, then ultimately my grandson will be a Mitzvah Shlishi. And about by the time we get to third generation, what? We're good to go. He can marry into the assembly of Hashem. So I don't understand. Afilo Rishona Nami. Then I both say, if we hold like Rabbi Yochanan said, that the status of the offspring follows the father, then why does Minyamin need his son to marry a mitzvah's sheni? Right? Even if his son, who is a sheni, marries what? Marries a rishon, it doesn't matter, because the offspring will still be a shlishi, because we follow the status of the father. It would seem to be the fact that Minyamin is so hooked on his son, the sheni, marrying a girl who is a sheni also, that apparently goes after the mother. So Rabbi Yochanan said to the Tana, you could even change it to Rishona. That Minyamin was saying, it really doesn't matter who my son marries. Whether my son marries a Rishona or a Shnia doesn't make a difference. His son is going to be a Shlishi, because halacha l'maisa, the status follows the father. Kiyasar Avdimi, Am Rabbi Yochanan, Mitzri Sheni Shenasa Mitzris Rishona, Bina Sheni Havi. But listen to this. But another statement, contradictory statement Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says that halacha l'maisa, if a Mitzri Sheni marries a Mitzris Rishona, their son is a Sheni. What does that show you? Alma basar ime shadinale. Well, say, what do you see from here? That Allah say you go after the mother. Amarle Abaye, Elahadar Rabbi Yochanan, Hifrish. So again, now what we're faced with, Rabbi say, is two contradictory statements of Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan himself being right, two different versions of Rabbi Yochanan. Version one, Rabbi Yochanan, we're following the father. Version two, Rabbi Yochanan, we're following the mother. The Gemara asks so Amarle Abaye, Elahadar Rabbi Yochanan. What about the fact that Rabbi Yochanan said the following? Hifish chatas mu'uberes v'yalda. But say, listen to this. What happens if you separated an animal for a chatos and the animal was pregnant? So I have a pregnant chatos. V'yalda, before I sacrifice the animal gave birth. What's talacha? Ratza miskaper ba ratza miskaper bevlada. So I will say, you could go ahead and use either the mother or the offspring as your chatos, whichever one you want. So we'll say, now here's what's interesting. If you hold that the baby, right, the baby inside of the chatas mother, if you hold that the baby is not considered to be an extension of the mother, literally a leg of the mother, then ultimately, again, that makes sense. So I'll say, then, when I separate out this pregnant animal for a chatas, Rabbi say, essentially, I look at the pregnant chatas as what? Two distinct animals. There's the mother and there's the fetus. And therefore, I will say, it's effectively as if I've what? Separated out two animals for chatas. I will say, now by the way, there's a concept like this. Let's say I have to bring a chatas. And the truth is, I'm a guy who likes to have a backup plan. I always like to have a plan B. So what do? I designate two animals. Now I'm only going to offer one of them. But I separate essentially the second one for achrayas. It's my insurance policy. You could do that by karbanos, and it's understood you're only going to offer up one of them. Shabbos say, listen to this. Now the other one, you have to set it out to graze. You can't just use it for mundane purpose. You have to set it out to graze. But the idea is like this. If you hold, ubar lav yerech imohu, that ultimately the fetus, the animal in utero, is not an extension of the mother. It's its own independent entity. Therefore, when I'm makdish a pregnant animal for chatos, it's as if I'm being makdish two animals. Ele I amrit uber yerech imohava, havele vlad chatos. But I say, ultimately, again, if you hold that the fetus is an extension of the mother, then ultimately, again, this fetus is the offspring of a chatas, and vlad chatas lemisa azil, and ultimately, again, the offspring of a chatas, ultimately, again, it has to be left to die. Ishtik, he was silenced. Amrle dilma shiny hasam. So the idea over here is, the Gemara says, how to view the child, or how to view the fetus in utero is a fundamental machlokas. Amrle dilma shiny hasam tichsiva sheyivaldu hakasuv tala'o beleda. So as I said to him, well, maybe mitzri is different because I was going back to what we said, Rabbi Huda, on the end of Ayin Zayin Amud Beis. Maybe it's different by ger mitzri. Why? Because the Torah uses lashon of leda of birth. So maybe by definition, what does that teach us? That the status of the mitzri offspring is going to be dependent on who? He or she who births him, i.e. the mother. To which the Gemara says, Amrle karkafna. We'll say karkafna, Rashi says, Adam chashuv, important man, chazisi l'reisheich beni amudi, ki am Rabbi Yochanan lahashmaita. Ultimately, I saw your head between the pillars when Rabbi Yochanan said this very ruling. In other words, that he was telling him, this is not your own chiddush. Rabbi Yochanan said this in the Beis Medrash, and I saw you that day in Shir, and Rabbi Yochanan said it. So both say, the idea that the Gemara seems to be settling on over here is that even Rabbi Yochanan would agree that the status of the offspring when it comes to the mitzri depends on the mother. Why does it depend on the mother? Asher yivaldu. Since the Torah bases it on leida, on birth, the status follows the mother. So we'll say what that effectively means is as follows. That if you have a mitzris rishona, right, a woman who's a first generation mitzri, who marries a mitzri sheni, husband is now a second generation mitzri, what's going to be the status of the kid? Mitzri sheni, right? Because now, according to where we're holding right now, the status is going to follow the mother. Shabbos say, beautiful Gemara now ahead of us. Says the Gemara, TALMUD the kasav asher yivaldu. Now, interestingly enough, the reason why this is so is because it's a shayivaldu. Haba alma basar avua shadinale. And I will say, here's what's interesting. The reason why by mitzri, in this case, we're going to follow the mother, status of the mother, is because the Torah used lashon of asher yivaldu, right? Ultimately, again, who birthed them. What does that indicate to us? What that seems to indicate to us is, without the pasuk, who would determine status? The father. The father. Now watch this. The Gemara says, Ella, here's the question. Ella hadamra rava, nochris mu'beresh shenis gaira. We'll say, listen to this. Let's say you have a non-Jewish woman who converts, and she's pregnant at the time of her conversion. She's pregnant at the time of her conversion. So we'll say, which means she goes to the mikvah for conversion purposes while she's pregnant. What's going to be the shayla? We'll say, what's the shayla? What's the status of the child? Now she gives birth. Remember, when is she giving birth? By the time she gives birth, she's already Jewish. So listen to this. Bina ein tzarich tvila. Her son, let's say she gives birth to a son, that baby does not require another immersion in the mikvah. Now we're assuming why is that? Amai in tzarich tvila. So the Gemara says, why is that? Amai in tzarich tvila. V'chi tema mishun Rabbi Yitzchak. Rabbi say, now here's the interesting idea, right? Obviously, the fact that the baby doesn't need tvila. Why is that? Because the tvila of the mother took care of the baby, right? That's essentially what's happening. The Gemara is trying to say, well, what's the mechanics of that? So watch this. This is fascinating. V'chi tema mishun Rabbi Yitzchak dvar Torah. Ruba umakbid alav chotzeitz. Ruba she'ena makbid alav eno chotzeitz. So I will say this is fascinating. What the Gemara is bothered by is how. Now again, I will say if you hold ubar yerech imo, if you hold that a baby is an extension of the mother, then I understand why the mother's tevila works for the child, right? Because the child is an extension of the mother. But if you hold ubar lav yerech imo, that the baby is not an extension of the mother, then how should the mother's tevila work for the baby? I will say, after all, in other words, what's the problem? Isn't there a chatzitza? I will say, the halakha is when you go to the mikvah, there can be nothing interposing between your body and the water. Well, I will say, the baby has one big chatzitza. And what is it called? Mami, right? It's mami. So what's going on over here? So maybe you'll say, no, maybe it's not a chatzitza. Why not? Because I will say, we learned midda oraisa, Ruba umakbid. Rabbi say on a Torah level, on a biblical level, a chatzitza is something which covers a majority of the body, and you don't want there, right? And you're makbid not to have it there. Rabbi say if you have something that covers the majority of the body, but you're not makbid, it's not a chatzitza. Oh, so Rabbi say is the fetus makbid on having the mother be a chatzitza? The answer is no. Right, the fetus wants the mother, so to speak, there, and therefore maybe it's not a chatzitza. To which the Gemara says, "Amud Beis, that's not good." Rav Kana lo shano elo rubo aval kulo chotzeitz. They will say, no. Even as Midaraisa will say it's rov. If something covers the majority of the body and you're not makbid, it's not a chatzitza. But if something covers the entire body, everyone agrees that halacha l'maaseh is a chatzitza. Obviously, the mother is covering the entire body, and therefore halacha l'maaseh is a chatzitza. So how does the tvila work for the baby? Ella, the Gemara says, aval kula chazat shiny ubar tahani rabise. Both say, interestingly enough, the hani rabise means, Rashi says, v'lav chatzitzu, hani rabise also means this is the way that the baby is formed. This is the way the baby develops. This is the normal fashion. So because this is the normal situation for an uber, for a baby, it's not a chatzitza. As Rabbi say, the definition of a chatzitza is something that is external and alien to the individual. It doesn't belong there, so to speak. But something that does belong there, by definition, is not a chatzitza. The mother belongs, so to speak, on top or enveloping the uber, the fetus. Therefore, by definition, it is not a chatzitza. And therefore, halacha l'maaseh, when the mother goes to the mikvah, when the Gentile mother goes to the mikvah while she's pregnant for a conversion, that conversion works for the mother and works for the baby as well. Incredible. To which the Gemara says, Kesra, Avina Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Bu'umos halach achar hazachar. But say, listen to this. In general, bu'umos, when it comes, Rashi says over here, B'sheva umos le'inyan lo sechaya kol neshama, halach achar hazachar. I will say, remember again, interesting halacha. There's a halacha that when Klal Yisrael comes into Eretz Yisrael, they have an obligation to wipe out the 7 indigenous nations. Being a member of the 7 indigenous nations, that identity goes after the father. Bumos halach achar hazachar, niskairu halach achar hapagum shebishnehem. Both say, listen to this. But if you have people who convert, so both say this because that's what we said before. Let's say you have 2 converts who marry. The status of the offspring goes after the pagum. They both say pagum means the parent who has we'll call it the heightened genealogical issue. We'll see what this means in just a moment. So what's the case of the umos? You go after the father. Kidisanya minayin leechad mina umos shabala knanis v'holid ben shatar ashelik nosa be'eved. We'll say, how do you know if a man from another nation, right, not one of the 7 indigenous nations, has a child with a Kananis, a woman from Canaan, that ultimately, again, the offspring, you're permitted to purchase it, you're permitted to purchase the offspring as a servant. In other words, which is another way of saying the offspring doesn't have the status of a Kenani. Shene'emar v'gam b'mnei toshiv hagarim machem behem tiknu. Yachal afilu echad mina Kenanim shabal achas mina umos. First white line. V'holid ben shadar sheliknos be'eved. You might have thought the same is true for a male Kenani who fathers a child with a woman from another nation. That such a child is permitted to maintain as a servant. Talmud lomar asher holidu ba'artzechem min hanoladim ba'artzechem v'lo min hagarim ba'artzechem. So both say this is halacha number one, and really quite amazing. Halacha number one, both say, is that when it comes to the 7 nations, identity is determined by paternity. By paternity. And therefore, again, an offspring only has the status of a Kenani if fathered by a Kenani father. But if he has another father from a different nation and a mother who's a Kenani, that offspring is not a Kenani. Next. Niskairu halach achar apagum shebishneim. Both say, watch this. B'mai, what's the case? Ilema b'mitzri shenasa amonis. So both say, if you're talking about a Mitzri who marries an Amonis, my pogum shebishnehem isba amoni v'lo amana. So we'll say, interestingly enough, if a Mitzri marries an Amonis, so we'll say, what's the status of an Amonis? What's the status of an Amonis? She's fine. Now again, is a Mitzri permitted to marry an Amonis? The answer is yes, because she's a Giores, right? But Lamaisa, what's the pogum? There's no, in other words, the Mitzri has baggage because he's got baggage up until 3 generations, but the Amonis doesn't have anything. Rather, Ella ba'amoni shenasa mitzris. Oh, now we'll say rather, what's the case? The case is of an Ammoni. Now we'll remember again, what's the status of an Ammoni? What's the status of an Ammoni? Right, an Ammoni is never permitted to come into Kal Hashem. Right, he's always going to be relegated to a limited marriage pool, and he marries a mitzris. He marries a first generation mitzris. So I'll say what's the shaila? What's the status of their offspring? To which the Gemara says it depends. Izachar havi shajei basramoni. If they have a son, so I will say the son will follow the status of the father. Namely, the son will be treated like a male Ammoni convert who will be limited ultimately again to that marriage pool. In a keva, and if it's a girl, whose status does she inherit? Shajei basra mitzris. She inherits her mother's. Right? Because remember again, if you would put her after her father, then what would be her status? What would be her status? Ammon is totally permitted. Instead, we put her after her mother, and she's considered to be a 2nd generation mitzris. Shabbos say, with the Gemara is advancing over here something really interesting, which is that halacha l'maisa, whenever you have a union between 2 gerim, both who have some marital limitations, the offspring follows what we'll call the more compromised. It's not compromised. The offspring will follow the status of the parent, l'chumra. Whichever parent has a more stringent status, that's who the offspring follows. And Rabbi say, the Rambam actually codifies this, la halacha. The Rambam says that halacha l'maisa, ultimately we go ahead and whenever you have this situation of 2 converts, each of them with some level of restrictions on them, the offspring will always follow, they'll call it the parent with the stricter status. Beautiful. Says the Mishnah, Mamzerim unesinin asurin ve'isr olam es echaz charim ve'echan nekeva. So we'll say mamzerim, and nesinim. We'll say, remember again, the nesinim, Rashi points out here, are their givonim. Sheniskairu ba'aramav me Yoshua, benasnum avadim lechot ve'etzim shalimayim. So we'll say, the nesinim are the people, they're the givonim, but when Yoshua comes into Eretz Yisrael, they pretended that they were not from Canaan. As a result, Yoshua made a treaty with them. After he found out that they were indigenous nations and should have been wiped out, he did not want to violate the treaty. So I'll say, so they were relegated to the status of servants for Klal Yisrael. Point over here is Mamzerim and Nesinim. Ultimately, again, they can convert, right? They can convert. Well, Mamzer does not convert. Mamzer is Jewish. But the point I will say is that these individuals, they are forever relegated to a limited marriage pool, and the prohibition applies both to men and women. Amrei Shlakish, mamzeres la'achar asara daros muteres. But let's say, this is a fascinating. Shlakish says, a mamzeres, right? A female mamzer. She, after 10 generations, she is permitted to marry into the general pool of Klal Yisrael. Really? The Gemara says, Yolif Asiri me Amoni umoavi. Rabbi say we learn out 10 right? 10. So let's listen to this. It says by Mamzer, Lo Yovo Mamzer Bekal Hashem Gam Dorasiri. Gam Dorasiri. Rabbi say, listen to this. Right, Mamzer can't come into the generation, can't come into Kal Hashem, even 10th generation. By Ammoni and Moavi, it also says, Gam Dora Siri Lo Yavo. Now watch this. So the Gemara says, Ma lahalo nekevos mutaros, afkan nekevos mutaros. Fascinating drasha. Just like by Ammon and Moab, ultimately again, women are permitted to enter into the assembly. So too by Mamzeres, after 10 generations, she is permitted to enter into the Kal Hashem. What? Ima lahalon miyad, afkan miyad. If you're going to make a gzer shava, Rabbi say, then say that just as an Ammonite or Moabite woman is permitted immediately, so to a Mamzeres is permitted immediately. To which the Gemara says, Ki ahani gzer shava me'asiri ve'elech. No, Rabbi say, at most the gzer shava could only work from the 10th generation on. Rabbi say, now we don't pass like this, but it's a fascinating gzer shava. Rabbi say, so what it's saying is, it's asiri from Mamzer to Ammon and Moab. Just like Ammon and Moab can't marry in, just like Mamzer can't marry in even after 10 generations, so to Ammon and Moab can't marry in even after 10 generations. But just like Ammon and Moab, a woman is permitted to marry in immediately. Mamzeres can't marry in immediately, but she can marry in after 10 generations. V'hanan tanan mamzerem unesim asuram v'isuram isra olam. Echa zekaron v'echa nekevos. But our Mishnah said that a mamzer is prohibited forever, both men and women. So even after 10 generations, the mamzer is still asura. Lo kasha, it's not a contradiction. Hakiman da'amar don minei umina. Hakiman da'amar don mina va'oki ba'asura. Rabbi says it's fascinating. We've seen this many times, which is, in the world of Kal V'chomers, there's a machlokes how to darshana Kal V'chomer. Rabbi say there's two different ways. There's don mina umina, which means, Rabbi will say, once you create a Kal V'chomer allows you to learn all of the details from the source item. Versus saying, no, when you learn a Kal V'chomer only allows you to learn out a specific halacha from the source item. So I will say, watch this. If you hold that once you make a Kal V'chomer, you can learn out everything from the source item. So therefore, once I'm going ahead and not a Kal V'chomer, I should say a Gzer Shava. Once I make a Gzer Shava from Mamzer to Ammon and Moab, then I can learn that for all halachas that teach me that just like a female, right, a female Ammon and Moab, a female convert from Ammon and Moab is permitted immediately, so to a female mamzeres is also permitted, not immediately, but after 10 generations. Whereas if you only hold that the Gzer Shava does not go all the way, then a female mamzeres is still going to be asura, and that's our Mishnah. Good. So it says, Sholus Rabbi Elazar, mamzeres la'achar asara dari mahu. What's the status of a mamzeres after 10 generations? I will say this is incredible. Amr Lam said to them, Mi'itin l'dar shlishi v'tana. 10 generations. You can't even find a mamzer after 3 generations. Then I will say, now why is that? Look at Rashi. Mi'itin l'dar shlishi. I will say, take a look. It's 5 lines into the white lines of Rashi. Mi'itin l'dar shlishi kilomar davar she'efshu. I will say, you're going to be hard pressed to find a mamzer after 3 generations. Now why is that? Almo kasavar mamzer lo chaye. Ultimately, Rabbi says, because ultimately, again, Rabbi Elazar said, mamzerim die out. Rabbi say, why do mamzerim die out? This is something Chadash Baruch Hu orchestrates in order that they do not taint the family lines of Klal Yisrael. Unfortunately, again, Hakadosh Baruch Hu does not allow mamzerim to live a long life in order that they should not taint the familial lines of Klal Yisrael. V'chein amar Rav Huna, mamzera lo chaye. Mamzer doesn't live. Baruch does not allow a mamzer to live a long life. But the Mishnah said mamzer ma'asr forever. Forever sounds like they do live long lives. Listen to this. It depends on the type of mamzer. The yada chaye. Rabbi will say, if everyone knows about this guy that he's a mamzer, or about this time they're mamzerim, then they live. Why did the Rabbi say? Remember again, what's the reason why Hashem would take away life from a mamzer? In order that this mamzer not taint the family lines of Klal Yisrael. So if everyone knows the family's a mamzer, then what? There's no fear of genealogical contamination. Why not? Because everyone knows to stay away from them. Listen to this. De lo yadi lo chaye. Ultimately, again, if no one knows about the mamzerus of this individual, this family, Hashem will not allow them to live. The yadi vid lo yadi, if some people know, but some people don't know, atlasi dare chaye tfei lo chaye. Hashem will allow the mamzer to live up to 3 generations, but not more than 3 generations. Rabbi say, by the way, isn't this an incredible yisod? So if everyone knows about the mamzer, they live, because there's no fear of intermarrying with the mamzer. No one knows about the mamzer, Hashem takes the life of the mamzer. Some know, some don't know, up until 3 generations. Rabbi just point out from here, what do you see? The fact that Hashem takes the life of the mamzer when no one knows about his mamzerus, an incredible yisod, Rabbi say, which is the needs of the klal always outweigh the needs of the individual. I will say this is a little bit countercultural because in today's day and age, everything is about personal rights. Everything is about the rights of the individual. And no one or nothing has a right to curtail the rights of the individual. Yiddishkeit does not believe in that. The needs of the collective always outweighs the needs of the few or the needs of the individual. So if there's a mamzer and no one knows about that mamzer, Hashem is going to prevent that mamzer from living in order that mamzer not cause problems for the rest of the kal. If everyone knows, they stay away from the mamzer. Not a problem. Some know, some don't know. Up to 3 generations. Let's just end with this. We'll say there was a mamzer in Rabbi Ami's neighborhood. Achriz aleh. No one knew about it. Rabbi Ami got up in shul. Maharanim v'Rabbanan, Ploni's a mamzer. Right? Ploni's a mamzer. So what happened? The guy started sobbing. He felt so embarrassed. To which Rabbi Ami says, Amrlei Chayim nasati lacha. Thank me, I've given you life. Because as difficult as it is now, everyone knows that you're a mamzer. At the end, now that everyone knows, ultimately, again, that is the secret to your longevity. We'll stop over here. Shkoyach. All right, Chevron Zoom, have a great day, everyone.